One more weekend of college football games means one more chance for voters to decide who should win the Heisman Trophy. And to break it all down with me, we've got Parker Fleming, college football data scientist, who you can catch on X at StatsOWar, as well as catch him on his website, cfb-graphs.com. Parker, before we begin talking about the Heisman, quick note here. I am going to a Christmas party, a festive sweater Christmas party at Cal Lutheran where I teach after this. And so that's why I look a little more festive than I normally would for conversations like these.
No judgment. I just thought you were in your Mr. Rogers era, and I was saying, you know what, you do your thing. That's totally great.
Yeah, exactly. Like thinking about Los Angeles as having a neighborhood in general is a very odd idea. But, sometimes it just happens around this time of year.
That's great. I try to be a little classy. Knew we were going to be on camera, so I rolled out of bed and got dressed up here. We can have a fancy, festive conversation about the Heisman. I think that would be a lot of fun.
I think so. I think so. We should be sipping champagne or eggnog or something while we do it. But we'll handle this. Let me start with a really important question because it does seem like that there's one kind of overarching narrative when it comes to the Heisman, and I think you can boil it down to this one question here: do you think the quarterback of the winner of the Big Ten championship automatically wins the award?
I don't think automatically. I do know they've made some changes with voting, so hopefully this year some people will wait a little bit and kind of get the full body of information. Although I say that out of one side of my mouth, out of the other side of my mouth, I'll say if you're just changing your vote based on this last game, that's bad. You want to make sure it's the entire body of work and kind of what you thought about the season. There is a big opportunity kind of among the big three. There's certainly a bigger opportunity for Mendoza and Sayin to kind of separate themselves having that game this weekend. The other favorite being Diego Pavia, who is sitting at home this weekend. And that seems a little bit tough just because either one of Mendoza or Sayin gets an opportunity for not only another data point in terms of games, but another data point in terms of the Heisman moment, which I firmly believe, voters are really looking for, not just who had the best season, but who's shown the best. The big question out of the Big Ten game here is, Mendoza has had a couple comebacks. They've had some dramatic moments. Ohio State has relatively been sleepwalking. Can Sayin put up a performance here that kind of shakes the sleepiness out of voters' eyes and kind of catapult himself from third to first? I think the burden, like the onus, is on him to really separate in this game.
I like that term sleepiness because it really has seemed like that Ohio State has been very workmanlike when it comes to the entire season. And I don't know if it's necessarily fair to say in that he's got this insanely talented stable of wide receivers around him. The talent is fantastic. The play design, play calling, all of that is fantastic and perhaps on another level compared with Mendoza. Yet at the same time, it does seem like the narrative is, well, Mendoza is doing more with less, and he is able to will his team to some kind of fantastic comeback when it's needed, notably, say, in the game against Penn State. And I'm curious if you think that is kind of a fair way to vote for the Heisman, where Mendoza's doing more with less, whereas Sayin has just about everything he needs, and they're both playing for a conference championship Saturday.
It is the question that plagues all of college football discourse. When we're talking about good, do we mean good as we've seen on the field, or do we mean good as in potential in the future? And that's kind of hard here. I think back to the 2023 conversation where there was a lot of Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix conversation, although I do believe Michael Penix finished second, if I recall correctly, there in that. But the difference and the knock against Daniels was, oh, he's throwing these bombs against Army, or, oh, he's staying late in games because the team's worse and they're having to, compete longer. And Bo Nix is throwing short passes because that's all he has to do. And my thought is that in your evaluations, you certainly want to take account of potential and those contextual, circumstances. For awards, I think you really need to focus on what happened on the field. And Jaden Daniels rightly won that award in 23 because he was putting up the best numbers on the field and had the best performance on the field. So I think that leans towards Mendoza and kind of diminishes the sleepiness argument. Now, if Julian Sayin throws up 500 yards in the Big Ten championship, something absolutely absurd, I think that he'll win it and be justified. So, but it's hard to say. They have similar resumes. Mendoza has been better. Both teams are equal quality. A 4-point spread, I think, is what's going into the weekend. But I just think Sayan's better, so I'm going to vote for him. I think you have to respect the resume and you have to respect the production, which not to take this off the rails and transition it is also an argument for Pavia's just production. Like I think there's a lot of people who really believe that just the sheer volume of involvement that Pavia has and the excellence with which he's handled that involvement are worthy of a Heisman campaign. And I don't think that's an insane argument by any stretch of the imagination. I think the way the odds are broken out right now, it looks like if Mendoza doesn't have a great game, Pavia could win, barring some sort of Julian Sayin going, absolutely nuclear on Indiana's defense.
I want to get to Diego Pavia in just a bit, but specifically when it comes to this Big Ten championship game, another plug for you, cfb-graphs.com, some incredible resources there. Please check it out if you have not done so. But you do feel like that the line is fairly sharp, that Ohio State should win this game by a decent number of points, not necessarily the overwhelmingly lopsided Big Ten championship games we've seen in seasons past, but you do feel like that Ohio State can win this one.
I do. I have Ohio State by about 5.5 points, so I'm actually a little more aggressive towards Ohio State than the line here. And while Indiana has been really really solid, I do believe that the pace issues that Ryan Day has imposed on this Ohio State team of trying to run fewer plays, trying to keep guys fresh, the efficiency measures actually have kind of accounted for that in a lot of ways. And I think there's a couple numbers that stand out here where you can see, Sayin and Ohio State's offense has been first on third and fourth down success this season, despite the fact that their run game has been underwhelming with regards to yards before contact, yards after contact. Indiana's defense is only 18th, which I make these stat previews and you see a bunch of 2s and 1s and 4s and 3s here on every facet of the game for each team. Indiana does, stand out as being a little relatively weaker in that third and fourth down success. I think when we kind of start to get under the hood and fit the puzzle pieces of this matchup together, even before we account for, I think Ohio State still has another gear. I do think that they're the more complete team. Now, how much of that is responsible for the quarterback versus the defense and how much influence can either of these players actually exude over the game? More than any other player on the field, but there are certainly some contextual elements to that as well.
Yeah, and I do wonder, and I think about this, and some really smart college football pundits bring this up all the time, where there are the occasional teams where you don't necessarily need to show your hand all the time. And that is maybe one of the reasons why, going back to your term sleepiness, Ohio State maybe hasn't shown all that much, that maybe this sort of slower pace is more by design so that all the really cool stuff that they can do, again, with these elite wide receivers, can actually be shown in a game like this when they do need to break them out, such against a formidable foe like Indiana.
Absolutely. And it's not something we haven't seen in college football. I think sometimes there's some fan cope there of, oh, we didn't care. Oh, we weren't trying. But you go back to, some of the Alabama teams or some of the like Georgia 2022, I think comes to mind of just, I almost wanted to bake a variable into my previews and projections and just say, does Georgia care this week? Like, are they actually going to turn it on? And I think we see some precedent of that. It's also hard to get these highly talented individuals who don't feel, threatened by the other team. It's hard to get them to be focused and be their best self outside of these big marquee games. And so I do think there is some legitimacy to it, even if it does get, abused a little bit and kind of overstated by fans. But specifically, Ryan Day talking about load management and the number of plays that they run a game. I think there's some evidence that they're pretty comfortable with. They've been kind of keeping their foot off the gas because they don't have to. They want to save it for the stretch run where they could end up playing, 17 games, I think is how you get there to the championship.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is a great time to introduce this idea of, if neither of these Big Ten quarterbacks win the Heisman, then in all likelihood, it will go to Vanderbilt's Diego Pavia. And it is fascinating that Vanderbilt would actually float the idea of playing an additional quote unquote exhibition game just to remind voters that Diego Pavia exists. How bad of an idea is this?
So deep in my heart, I do have a fondness for Coastal Carolina and BYU in 2020, making a game happen, driving the truck over the mountain on a day's notice, getting it there. And I think many of us were naive and thinking, hey, maybe college football scheduling could be more flexible and more dynamic. Bill Conley over at ESPN has long had the idea about an open week. I think he called it a bracket buster week, where the second week of October everyone doesn't schedule a game, and then you pair people up based on similar resumes, and you get some clarity into the postseason. I think all these innovative scheduling ideas really just do get bottled up by the friction of inertia of college football. And a little bit right now in this day and age with the CSC rolling out and all these NIL uncertainty and bills in front of the House, I think the NCAA is a little bit worried about losing control of the inmates, if you will. And I think letting a team try to dramatically alter the system like this, I think they would have come down hard on that to try to keep everybody in line. So a silly idea. I mean, I think the reality is, Diego Pavia put up a great season. Whether he wins the Heisman or not, you can look at PFF grades. 90 over 90 on passing, over 80 on rushing, 3,000 yards in his passing overall, and really good metrics underlying. Even if you want to get weird, 6.6 big time throw rate, only a 2.5 turnover worthy play, 9.4 yards per attempt. I can rattle all these off. He did have his opportunities though, and you could argue he sat in some of those and didn't put up the biggest statistical performances. I do think it's kind of silly that this is the case, but if they win a game like Texas, instead of just mounting a good comeback with empty yards, if they win that Alabama game or keep it close, or Pavia has a close drive at the end where he gets them, where they get another opportunity, I think that those moments, as I alluded to more earlier, are more important than just the statistical production. And you start to go through this, and while he's been awesome, I just don't see the Heisman moment, even against Missouri, a game where they won. And you think, great, notch under his belt. He had decent production against that. They only put up 17 points, and Missouri's quarterback went out at halftime there, I think. So it is hard to see where Pavia's moments are relative to what Mendoza or Sand could put up this weekend.
I'm with you there, because even say the game against LSU, for instance, yes, it could have been that opportunity to be a series of Heisman moments in that contest, but then we saw that program absolutely collapse. And so that Missouri and certainly others, it felt like context was kind of ruining his overall campaign. Certainly when it comes to marketing and what Vanderbilt has put out, that should have helped in some way. But I'm with you. This isn't something where it's not a knock against him. I mean, he's fantastic for the sport, to say the least. At the same time, I think if Vanderbilt had perhaps accomplished just a little bit more, maybe competed in this SEC championship game, win or lose, then I think that would have been a phenomenal story. But again, when you've got a juggernaut like Ohio State and this up-and-comer like Indiana, and you have one more data point, it does seem like, and maybe it's not okay to say this out loud, but I think it's still important to bring into focus here. Maybe some voters are torn and they need some kind of a tiebreaker, and maybe this is it. And also given the fact that the last two Heisman winners really weren't champions, Colorado and LSU, they were not champions those years. And so maybe this is kind of that change of pace where they want to make sure that they get back to someone who can lead their team to a title. And Diego Pavia, unfortunately, won't be able to do that.
Correct. And last year, honestly, is a weird one to compare in general. I think the COVID rosters, I say this on almost every, hit I do these days, but the COVID rosters just messed up development and our expectations of everything. And even last year, the best quarterback, like Cam Ward, was still erratic in some ways, very, very exciting. And then you've got a couple running backs in Ashton Jeanty and Cam Scatabo putting up insane numbers, but Jeanty kind of hitting that glass ceiling, being a G5 running back despite the absurd numbers. And then Travis Hunter, really, it was less him being the best player, I think, for the Heisman, more so just the most interesting and like a historical sense of college football. And he was great. The sheer number of snaps he put up were incredible. I think if you're going to give credit to snaps for a defensive back who plays some wide receiver, you also might think about linemen in that too, like a lineman, a left tackle who grades out really well, who plays the entire season, probably adds as much value there. But I do think last year's was a little bit of an asterisk year, not to diminish Travis Hunter as a player, because he is a freak and very, very talented. And the sheer workload he put up is so impressive in terms of overall value to a team. But there also wasn't a quarterback who stood out, who clearly could have done it. And historically, I think when you don't have that dominant quarterback, that's when you see kind of the other positions winning. But in general, we're seeing kind of a return, I think, this year to best quarterback on the best team. That's your Heisman.
I couldn't have a Heisman conversation with you without talking about Notre Dame's Jeremiah Love, especially when you consider the explosives, just how dominant this ground game has been for them all season long. Yet it does seem like, especially if you're looking at sports books, his odds are not nearly as strong as the other ones. And it does seem like, on the one hand, yeah, it's going to be tougher and tougher as football continues to evolve for running backs to win this honor. Yet, on the other hand, he does seem like one of those rare talents who, if maybe these quarterbacks weren't as good, would have gotten more serious consideration.
Yes, certainly it's circumstantial, and Jeremiah Love is a great football player. I think that even stepping around the conversation about positional value in the NFL, because we know rush rates at college are a little bit different, and we know that the leverage that the run game can have is a little bit different due to the stylistic differences and talent disparities. In terms of overall impact, I just think that Love was a very, very trendy preseason Heisman pick. And I know a lot of people were kind of loudly advocating for it and kind of betting on the continuation of the quarterback instability, which I think maybe it could have lasted 1 year. I don't think that was totally out of left field, but I just think apples to apples, the number, like the sheer amount of production you'd have to put up on a team to kind of overturn one of these quarterbacks on an undefeated team to be the running back in modern college football, as the Heisman is just is too much. And then applying the same standard to Pavia that we're applying to Love. It's not totally his fault, but like they lost their first two games and he did not have his moment. Also, Notre Dame's schedule, the way it shook out, they played two really hard games early on. He went off against USC, but at this point, we've had 5 games since that USC game, and it's just kind of been ho-hum. Even the Pittsburgh game, Pat Narduzzi basically said, it'll be fine. We're not worried about it. And it just kind of happened. So Love just really didn't have that late moment where he had the opportunity to show against elite competition, I am such a difference maker, that I am so valuable to my team. That I'm undeniable here, and that's just kind of how it shook out for him, despite a really solid season and an absurd 6.9 yards per attempt. Like that's absurd, especially playing a full slate of power or of FBS teams.
Yeah, 6.9 yards per attempt and, yards after contact, all of that stuff, was truly sensational. And it is one of the reasons why, okay, maybe he doesn't win the Heisman, but Notre Dame will be an absolute force come playoff time. They will be a team you absolutely have to take seriously. And I think you and I are both in agreement as far as that's concerned. As far as the Heisman candidates, and we've mentioned 4 of them here, which one are you most comfortable with will shine come playoff time?
The first example is Sayan. I think just for what we've mentioned before about moving that next level. Also, the receivers he has makes that really, really nice, really, really easy. I wonder if in the kind of pace of playoff getting healthy a little bit, Ty Simpson, who nervous calling him a Heisman candidate, is still on the board, has it. It doesn't kind of let his pro pedigree show and kind of establish that he is really, really excellent as a quarterback. But I do think Sayan's the one where at the end of the playoff, I would not be surprised if we look back and say like, oh, that's the best player in college football. Like, yep, we're there. We understand that. And getting those marquee matchups here in the playoff gives him the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Ty Simpson with Alabama because on the one hand, yeah, he is technically on the board, far down, but I suppose it's still a possibility. On the other hand, he does have a sliver of an opportunity, given that Georgia is favored in this contest. Game being played in Atlanta, Georgia's defense, we know how great they are. At the same time, then if Ty Simpson goes off and the two Big Ten quarterbacks have a ho-hum kind of contest where it's more of a defensive kind of contest, then maybe that one data point would be enough. It would have to be some sort of 62-0 kind of performance, but that's not nothing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he does have the opportunity for the moment. Can he make up the production? Can he erase some of the negatives that he's had? I don't necessarily know. But in terms of overall quality, it's certainly there. If, again, shamelessly plugging my website and looking at that, another quarterback who, might have an argument in terms of overall value whose team did not give him the opportunities. USC's Jaden Mayaba is number one in total EPA, and so in terms of total impact to his team, EPA per touch, including rushing and passing, he's still a little bit lower. Like the volume did help, but what's what's the game of football other than who can put up the most value? And Mayaba has certainly done that and played really, really well. 161 total EPA for him, and Sayan is only at 149. So a substantial gap there, even as the per touch numbers are a little bit different.
You're not just saying that because I'm based in LA, are you?
I'm just pandering to audiences. That's all I do on this, No, I just think the conversation is so interesting because the Heisman is it best? Is it most valuable? Is it most popular? Is it who sends out the coolest little trinkets to the media beforehand? It's a moving standard every year. So I think it's worth celebrating. The whole point of the Heisman is celebrating good college football players, and Mayava has had a really great season. Also, I do think my weird Heisman idea is that they should have to vote for two linemen on both sides and invite 10 people and just make it a bigger celebration of everyone. And that way, like the little differences between who wins are smaller relatively. But we know now that it is kind of a popularity contest among three to four players, depending on how many quarterbacks are on undefeated teams in a given year.
Yeah, that is an interesting idea. If for no other reason, college football probably does the best job of awarding something to everyone at every position, much more so than really any other sport. I mean, I know I heard this on another podcast not that long ago. Maybe the NFL should start to adopt some college football ideas when it comes to awarding the best guard, tackle, punter, whomever. Maybe it's something where college football can kind of extend this overall philosophy into the Heisman so that we are celebrating those who have had massive achievements, and so that we're not just focused on the quarterback, but we're focused on what the team has to do to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know. I can get pessimistic about the playoff and say like it's just going to become like the NFL, where when you lose a regular season game, you wipe a tear and then you say, you know what, we're going to be fine. We'll get them in the playoffs. But in general, the more college football can kind of celebrate the immense commitment that these student athletes have, put on the field, and reward not just, hey, here's the top 12 playoff teams. Like Cincinnati is on the Joe Moore Award, and they've fallen off. Their line is amazing this year. Their line has been very, very good. And so celebrating that, even as they've kind of fallen out of national contention, I think is good for the sport. Absolutely.
If you want to read more playoff besmirches, you can catch Parker on X at StatsOWar, and also check out his fantastic work at cfb-graphs.com. Parker Fleming, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for having me.